Anbernic RG35XXSP isn't the first Game Boy Advance SP clone, yet it is likely the best one out there. Game Boys are and will always be my favorite portable handheld formats. It's pure nostalgia for me at this point, but the Game Boy Advance SP was beloved by gamers around the world for good reason. This clamshell form factor was near perfection at a time where mobile gaming was a recipient of rapid innovation. That's also why it isn't a surprise to anyone that Anbernic's SP is also off to a very hot start on the market. I wouldn't fault anyone for thinking this console was an actual Game Boy Advance SP by merely looking at it. It's a bit thicker and not as clean with the buttons and the ports as the original SP was, but I actually think Anbernic did a great job in recreating the form factor for modern times. Since this is an emulation machine, there's no cartridge slot. Instead, there are two micro SD card slots on the bottom frame next to the headphone jack. Then the top side provides users with a USB-C and a mini HDMI port to push out images to a bigger display. Speaking of images, when the clamshell pops open, a 3.5-inch IPS display fills the real estate. It's a near perfect square as the 4:3 aspect ratio pushes the display to a 640 by 480p resolution. That's slightly different from the 3:2 aspect ratio of the actual Game Boy Advance SP, but you won't have to lose any information as since this is an emulation platform, the aspect ratio can be adjusted by the system it's emulating. I wouldn't go around bragging about the screen Anbernic used here, but for something so small and faithful to the SP's portability, I'm perfectly content with what we have here. The pixel density is enough to make the Game Boy Advance games feel sharp to look at on this sub 4-inch display. The viewing angles are also consistent across all the positions you can possibly use. It's a decent screen to look at while playing old games. The responsibility of being the device's default front end goes to Retroarch, like a lot of devices. It's a pretty standard ordeal for anybody who has experience with emulation handhelds. I don't love the limited customizability on this build out of the box, but if it's something that really did bother me down the line, I could always dedicate some time to modifying it. That's the beauty of these emulation consoles. We're literally buying it just for the hardware. The front end can always be altered later if you really want to. Anbernic provides buyers of a micro SD card loaded with up to PSP and PS1 ROMs. That should give you a clear indication of what the company believes the hardware is capable of emulating. There's a quad-core ARM processor with 1GB of RAM pushing the SP through. I went into this not expecting it to play kindly with 3D era titles. To my surprise, some PS1 games like Activision's 2000 Spider-Man ran basically flawlessly. Even a game like Tekken 3, which I expected some frame drops on, surprised me with how fluid it ran on the SP. Of course, not every title will be realistically playable and run with good playable frame rate, but my point is that it pushed the boundaries of what I personally thought it would be able to handle. When I pitted the RG35XXSP against competitors like something like the Powkiddy RGB10S or the Miyu Mini, which we reviewed in the past, I found the SP actually matched up to those products extremely well. I went back and reviewed those reviews, and a lot of what I had to say there actually replicates here on what I believe this thing can handle. As long as you go into the SP knowing the capabilities and limitations of what platforms it can emulate, I think a majority of people will be quite happy with this Game Boy replica. And that threshold, I do think, is mainly due to the look and feel of the SP. While the console is made of plastic and lighter than I would have assumed it would be from looking at it, I do think it is built well overall. It doesn't come near the premium ranks of some of the other Game Boy clones out there nowadays, but there's something to be said about having a portable console that you don't mind getting dinged up slightly here and there. I have the transparent blue model that takes the design language made popular by the Game Boy Color in order to see the parts inside of the SP. I personally do find the colorways that Anbernic offers to somewhat cheapen the product a bit, but I also understand that this isn't an actual Nintendo Game Boy Advance SP, and the paint quality can't compare to that level, unfortunately. Still, most of my gripes with the RG35XXSP really lies behind the weight. Being lightweight has its benefits, but I do find the SP to feel slightly awkward in my hands. The bulk of the weight comes from that 3,300 milliamp hour rechargeable battery, which keeps the system alive for roughly 8 hours of Game Boy Advance gameplay. Later generations of gaming consoles will cut that number down, of course. While the battery life is still decent, it takes forever to charge. Back to the weight thing, though. I just felt like the SP didn't feel balanced or well balanced in my hand. I realize it's ironic to mention that the actual original Game Boy Advance SP weighs less and is physically smaller than this device, but for some reason it didn't feel that way when holding them in succession back to back. It's not that big of a deal, but I might be somewhat missing that cartridge slot weight as like a comfort pillar of sorts. I realize that some of my dislikes about this SP stems from my own comparisons to the official Nintendo console, which of course I owned it and I loved and used it dearly, but that's also expected when the product's form factor is a clone of a beloved product. From the first time I flipped this clamshell open, I also felt something was just a bit off about it. Anbernic uses a Hall and magnetic switch to pull the lid down to the base when they're close to one another. The hinge relies on an alloy access that allows the max angle to recline to 190 degrees. The clamshell form factor works nicely, but as with the weight distribution, it just didn't feel right for some reason. There isn't a satisfying click or any indication that would let you know you've reached the minimum closure before the magnetic pull kicks in. Once again, these are just things that I can't help but look at the original Game Boy Advance SP with nostalgic glasses and compare it to this. It then goes without say that if you're reliving nostalgia and that's your prime intention, then actually Anbernic has done surprisingly a good job of that. This is especially true when a Game Boy game is running. I would occasionally get lost in the immersion as if I was legitimately holding a original Game Boy Advance SP again. Everything is quite acceptable with the replication. The buttons are clicky and they don't stick to the shell. Audio quality, though, is tinny and gets distorted quickly at higher volumes, so headphones are a must if you're doing serious gaming sessions. Still, you can survive with them for short spurts. The one thing I was pleasantly happy about was the vibration motor. This is an addition that, of course, the original consoles and most of what this can emulate doesn't utilize. However, the PS1 does. The vibration that this SP emits is subtle enough not to be disturbing, but pronounced enough to be something you remember. I like it for this form factor. A modern Game Boy wouldn't be complete without modern amenities of gaming from this century. Save states are the best way to live with games for working adults. It allows you to set the console down and pick it up anytime without forcing players to add a few more extra minutes at a time to reach a save point. I can't live without it, and this feature allows me to relive a lot of these games that take a lot of time that I probably wouldn't have the time to play anymore now that my schedule is always so full. While I don't personally use this handheld to do this thing, it can stream PC games through Moonlight streaming. Plug the SP into a TV and use a Bluetooth controller with it, and this can actually become quite a little modern gaming hub that can be taken anywhere thanks to just how small it is. There's a lot of versatility here. There's a lot to like here. While nostalgia is a big factor in why the RG35XXSP even exists, I personally find it to be the biggest weakness as well. Unlike an analog pocket that was a better Game Boy than the Game Boy it replicated, the Advance SP was, and is still surprisingly, a masterful product. The form factor and the quality in which Nintendo developed their SP was superb and ahead of the times. That makes any clone have a tall hill to climb. I actually think that this SP would be an amazing experience for any young adult who wasn't around for the original Game Boy era of portable handhelds. In fact, they may even appreciate this little bundle more than someone who has biases towards the original. Whatever the use cases or experiences with the original Game Boy might entail, I find it hard to go wrong with the Anbernic RG35XXSP at this sub 100 MSRP price tag. Once again, I'm Alex from the Subnautics. Let me know what you guys think of this Game Boy. If there's another Game Boy clone that you guys want us to review, let us know in the comments below. I have a lot of them in store for this channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video.